Watch us paving new roads, yeah, we innovate. Civil engineers redesign and elevate. 3D visions in the air, getting ready to create. Move beyond limits, never hesitate. From highways to bridges, we're making the scene. Blueprints in hand, we build what we mean. Phasing it right, we got the plan in sight. Building the future every day and night. Come on, we construct the dreams.
Hello and welcome to video number 7, where we're going to talk all about using the phasing system within Civil Engine. And phasing is one of those things that it's very basic, like the basics are easy to comprehend, but once you get into it, especially with complex things, it can get very, very complicated very quickly. And a lot of that's just project by project stuff that you're going to have to work through. But I do want to at least give you the basics and then show you a few examples so that you can think through how this process works. And I'm going to be focusing on phasing with a little bit of focus on alternatives, but this system works for both phasing and alternatives. The basics of phasing is that everything you place in your scene will show up in the hierarchy. So if we place a tree, let's grab a tree. If we place it in our scene, we go back, that tree is now in the asset portion of the hierarchy. Everything that's in the hierarchy can be phased, and that's what we're going to be focusing on today. The way you create a phase is down here in the phasing panel. You click there, and then you can create new phases. I'm going to show the way that I usually think about these types of projects, but again, this is going to depend on project to project, and alternatives are going to be handled a little bit differently. But essentially, most projects can be broken up into 3 different phasing. One of them is existing, doesn't change, create phase, existing does change, and then proposed. All right, so why do we do this? We do this because let's say that we have a project and there are going to be parts of the actual project that don't change, they stay the same the whole time. But then more importantly, things like the terrain, the mountains, the buildings, all of that is part of existing, but it doesn't change. And then this existing does change can be broken into a ton of pieces, and proposed can be broken up into a ton of pieces as well. So let's go to our dynamic assets. Let's go to other, and let's make a dynamic text. And so what this is it's 3D text that you can place in your scene. And this one, we're going to call this, actually we can edit it here. This will be a little bit easier. So we want this to say existing doesn't change. All right, and then let's make another one. All right, so we've got our 3 elements. We go to our hierarchy, we will see they all show up here. So let's just rename these so that we can know what they are. All right, so not too confusing. EDC, E does see and propose. So let's go to our phasing, and we have those here. So this one's going to be pretty straightforward, but we're going to have existing doesn't change, and then we're going to have existing does change, and then we're going to have proposed. So now if we go and we shut off existing doesn't change, that turns off does changed, proposed. All right, so that's the basics of the phasing system. You can take it to the next level by going to the publisher and creating a chart, which is a Gantt chart. So we have 3 available phases, and we can add these. So let's make sure and add all these. And now you can see they show up here. So the existing doesn't change. You would want that to be the extent of the entire thing. Existing does change would show up in the beginning, and then proposed would show up afterwards. Again, this is the very basics, and there would be way more pieces and levels if you were doing this on a more detailed type project. So in the beginning, you want both the existing that does change and the existing that doesn't change. And then as time goes on, you're going to get the existing doesn't change and then proposed. We can also change the colors of these. So existing doesn't change, let's leave that white. Existing does change, let's make that green. and then the proposed, let's make that red. So now our colors even match our text. Just a quick overview. This stuff's pretty self-explanatory, but if you go into the details of your chart, you can change the name of it. You can also adjust where the track is. So you can see here we adjusted those up and down. I showed you how you can change the colors. You can change the dates. So if you want them to go out further, you can. And then you can also adjust the dates. So there's the track, and then there's also the chart. So the chart's going to be for the entire length of the project. And then playback length. This is kind of speed. If you wanted to go super fast, 2 seconds. If you want it to be slow, something like 20 seconds. And then you can also adjust the track size. So you can see here we've got large, we've got medium, and we've got small. And then you can also hide the dates, hide the header up at the top, and hide the active phase labels over there on the right. So very basics. This is how you're going to typically think through your phasing project. One thing I want to note, in real life scenarios, anything that is existing doesn't change. You just don't want to leave any phase, because what happens there is it just stays on all the time. So if I go back to my Gantt chart and let's just delete this. So you can see here, existing doesn't change, stays there the whole time. So if there is truly things that don't change, things like buildings and roads and terrain, then you just want to not tag it at all. That's going to be the easiest way to handle those things. That way you can focus on only tagging phases to the elements that will change over the course of your project. All right, so I'm going to look at another more complicated example now, and you can do this as well. If you go to example projects, there's one called Waterfront Park. So click on that. And we have just a simple paving example here. And feel free to reverse engineer any of this. But you can see here we've got this beautiful road with pavement markings placed in Civil Engine. Again, all this stuff shows up in the hierarchy. So we've got paths. This one we don't have areas. We have assets, and we have the base model. You can always turn these on and off to check what's going on. And then usually I lock them just to hide the selector icons. And again, the striping, if you want to do that, that's the pavement markings. And some of these have phases, and so we'll show what those are. We have existing, closure, removal, paving, final. So we could go here and we could turn these on and off manually, but it's much easier, as I've already shown, to go into the publisher and use the Gantt chart. All this is it's just a really simple on-off trigger. That's all a Gantt chart is. So let's go to our chart and let's change this to smalls, make sure we can see everything. Looks like medium's probably most appropriate. So here we've got a February 2025 as purple. That's the way things are here. Let's zoom back a little bit. And now if we switch here, you can see here we've got a closure. Now this closure, it's going to remain on during the removal and the paving phases. So we've got our arrow board, we've got our temporary barriers, and we've got those turning on and off. And so when you get to the removal, you can see here now all these construction vehicles show up. And in reality, all of these assets are there in 3D space. The visibility is just being turned on and off. So continuing on, we move along, and now we're in the paving phase. Again, all this closure stuff stays the same. Also, there are traffic paths that are being turned on and off because we've got to have the traffic merging over. And so in existing, we had traffic there, and then we've got to have traffic merged over. So even the traffic paths can be phased and should be appropriately. So this one we've got paving, we've got our paver, we've got our roller, and then we've also got a chunk of this fresh asphalt that's here as well that wasn't here for the removal phase. And then if we keep going, eventually we'll have the final. And the final, we've got our striping back on, and then we've got that fresh pavement to show this is the area that we did. So this is a simple example, but it's more complex than what we did before. So I was scrubbing through, just clicking on the scrub bar and going left and right. But you can do this by just pushing play, and it will just play through, and it will just loop. And then one trick you can do if you want to preview it with some movement is you can just use these simple cameras, like you could use pan, or you could do something like the orbit camera. And for this one, you want to double right click to make sure that the camera is centered in the right location. And then you can adjust things like the distance and the angle. So this is a cool way to preview it. If you want something more advanced, and this will be discussed further in video 8, which covers cameras and rendering, but you can go to the sequencer, and let's say that we want cameras to kind of follow this progress. So let's go back to cameras. Let's make video. Let's see how long that is. That's probably a little fast. So let's do 20 seconds. And then let's do one more that's kind of like our final one. And so now we can go to our sequencer. Let's place both of these. Let's do a new timeline. We want to do video set C and video set D. Those are the ones we just created. We also want to make sure that this is 30 seconds. That should be appropriate. And then the way we want to tie our phasing in is we go to phasing and we can go new chart. That's the one that we created. We didn't rename it. And by default, it's 10 seconds, but we can extend that out to the full 30 seconds. And now all of those changes are going to happen while we're flying the camera over. So that's a really cool way to kind of tie your cameras and your phasing and everything all together. You can also add some text if you wanted to. I won't do all these, but like let's say that we wanted to do existing. We can put that here in the beginning, make sure it extends to where the existing part of the phase goes, and we just want that text to say existing. And then we could make it much bigger. And then we could do another one and make that at the end and call that final or proposed. And so I'm not going to do all of them, but you can have the phases as part of that. And then when you're happy with it, then you go to render, select your resolution, your output folder, all of that. And if you want to do your frames per second, you got to set it here in the details. Go to render. I like 60. Adjust your quality settings, and then click render, and it's going to render that all together into one video file. All right, most of the time you're going to be doing phasing with elements that you're importing as base model or imported assets. And so I do want to show an example of that. And this is going to be more complex than what we've been doing, but probably not as complex as some of the projects that you will be facing. So I'm here in SketchUp, and we've got this bridge. And what I need to do is I need to export and import this as separate pieces so that I can phase it when we get into Civil Engine. So I have everything the way I want. The problem is I need to export individual pieces. So I'm going to do first is you want to explode it down to the point where it's the components that you want to export. So you don't want to explode all the way to where it's just the faces and the lines, but you do want to explode it down pretty far. And I haven't tested this as much with InfoWorks, so proceed carefully there. But most of these principles should apply. So we want these pure columns to come in separately. So let's export them separately. So go to File, Export. And let's call this Pier 1. And then this is very important. When you click on Options, you need to make sure it says Export Only Current Selection. And then we want to export that. All right, when I'm done exporting, what I do is I just go to Hide. It didn't show up on your screen, but on the other screen, you just right-click and then select Hide. That way I know that I've already exported it. All right, so go to the next one and do the same thing.
Dreams meet the beats. Civil engineering can't accept defeats. From the city blocks to the rural lanes, mapping out the routes where progress reigns. Phasing through the signs, we make it tight. Bridging gap precision, our stories were told.
All right, so I've exported everything. You can check if you want. Again, the drop down showing up on my other screen. If you just go to Edit and then go to Unhide and then go to All, then you'll see that they can all come back. All right, so now we're back in Civil Engine, and we want to start importing those assets. So again, you can import these as base models or assets. The difference, as a reminder, is base models will be tracked when you're placing things. Assets will not. Those are more things that you want to place on top of base models. So let's go to our downloads folder and let's start finding these pieces. So Pier 1, we want to make sure that this is centimeters, finish import. All right, so it's over there. Usually when you import base models, you want the point of origin to be in the center, but here we don't because we want them to import relative to each other. So let's do the next one. So let's get import new and go to Pier 2. Same settings. All right, that looks like it should. And then Pier 3. Okay, so let's import the deck. All right, and then we can go in the hierarchy and we can see all these and we can turn them on and off as necessary to make sure everything looks legit. Okay, next we just need to make sure that we get these things textured. So let's go to the texture menu.
In the workshop, stacking dreams like bricks. With every layer, we're perfecting the mix.
All right, so now we've quickly textured our bridge with the realistic textures in Civil Engine. And now I'm just going to combine some other elements just to show you're not usually going to just have imports, you're going to have other parts of Civil Engine. So let's place some traffic.
Innovations in motion, watch the traffic grow. Let's go. Cutting through the chaos, precision is key. Building up the future for you and me. We're drafting dreams on these bustling roads. Civil engineers shaping what unfolds.
All right, so I placed traffic and then I placed construction equipment. And you may have noticed I turned off the traffic while I was doing the construction equipment, just because, again, when you're doing this, there are tons of elements in the same 3D space, and we're just turning them on and off. So before I made the phases, I just manually turned them off using the visibility toggles in the hierarchy. All right, so now let's make our phases. So the first phase we'll call Pier 1, and then I'm just going to go through and make all these. All right, so I've got 7 phases: Pier 1, Pier 2, Pier 3, substructure, bridge deck, asphalt, final. So I need to assign these to every one of those where they're going to show up. And sometimes they're going to show up in more than one. I don't know if we're going, yes, we will. Okay, so let's start out with the base models. So Pier 1, we want to show up in Pier 1, but then we also want it to show up in all the other phases because we don't want it to turn, well, I guess there are 2 ways you could do this. So you could just have it show up in the one, and then in the Gantt chart, make sure it's extended all the way, or you can just have it show in all of them, and the Gantt chart won't do it. So multiple ways to handle this. Let's start out just trying to assign them to the ones that they're supposed to, and then turn all the on and off controls in the Gantt chart. And then we need to go with these assets, and we need to turn them all on. So these rollers, we want to show up in asphalt, and the concrete truck, we want to show up in the bridge deck because it's going to be pouring the bridge deck. And then the pass, they are off, but we want them to show up in the final. All right, so we've got chaos here. You'll sometimes have that while they're turned on. So again, we can control them all here, manually one by one, or we can control them using the Gantt chart, which is what we are going to do. Also, let's make sure we get that bridge deck textured to concrete. All right, so we're here in 4D phasing. We want to create a new chart. If you do open a project and there's already a chart there, it's just a known bug where it will perpetuate from one project to another in the same Civil Engine session. Just delete it, create a new one, and we want to click to edit. And so all of our phases are going to show up here on the available phases. So let's add those in. And let's also go to small here so that we can see them all. And then you can see where they're going to go, and then they're going to shut off. We don't want that. We want Pier 1 to go the entire time, and then we want Pier 2 to show up beyond the entire time, Pier 3, and so on. Again, we could have handled that by just tagging these with all the phases, or just by using the Gantt chart. All right, so we've got them all set up the way we want, and then let's just do colors just because it looks better and we want to differentiate them. All right, so let's try it and see what happens. All right, so you saw we have an issue here. Let's zoom in so we can see better. So we love our concrete truck and our rollers, but we want them to shut off for the final phase. So we want the bridge deck to show up. So let me think this through. And this is gonna be a lot of the process. You just have to think it through. So for these ones, for those elements in the hierarchy base models, let's make sure that these show up for all of them. And then what we're going to do is just make sure that those construction equipment don't show up by managing that in the Gantt chart. So if we go to bridge deck, let's make that shorter, just like that. All right, so multiple ways to handle these kind of things. That's how I did it. And let's test it again.
From urban sprawl to wide open space, rethinking connections, enhancing the pace. That's right. Smart tech on the rise, we're turning the tide through every revolution.
All right, so that's it. That's how you use the phasing system within Civil Engine. I'm going to show a few more examples, but before I do that, let's just set up a camera and let's do one of those cool fly-throughs so that we can do this all as one video. So just our field of view, let's do 40. And in our sequencer, we only need one camera for this. And then we want to go to phasing, add our chart. And now it should build while we're moving along. All right, let's add one more camera for the end. Go back to our sequencer. Let's add that here. And then extend out our phasing. And actually, it will hold that last phase. So if we just want it to all be done within the first camera and then just hold the proposed for the final, we can do that. All right, just for curiosity, let's try this one and see what it looks like. All right, pretty cool. Obviously, this is a very simple example. Yours will be more complex, but hopefully you understand the basic principles. And as a bonus tip, you can always do cool things like these different scene effects and then blend those with other ones and do all sorts of cool stuff. All right, I now want to investigate another one of our example projects. This one's simply called Bridge Construction with Detour, something that we've built. It's our most complex phasing project as far as these example projects go. And I invite you to dig deeper into how it works and all the different phases that we have here. You can see this one we had to break the base model into a lot of different pieces. And one thing to note as well that I didn't show up before, if a phase is off, then it's going to not be editable or you can't make any changes to it in the hierarchy unless that phase is back on. So if we turn on all these phases, there's going to be a lot of stuff in the same 3D space, which will be absolute pandemonium. But now we can at least make adjustments to these different phases. So just a note there. And every one of these, you can see the box is checked for which phase it shows up. And then as a reminder, the stuff that never turns off, like these trees, that stuff, you just don't want to phase it with anything because then it will just show up for everything. So let's get these back to the way they were. And this example, it's an earthen embankment going over this river. We've got pipes that are perpetuating the water, but we want to build a bridge. And to build a bridge, you can't just make it go there. We've got to do something with the traffic. So we've made a detour. So this is going to make way more sense if we go to the publisher and we look at the Gantt chart, which has already been set up. So we've got existing. Now they're building up the earthen embankment. Now the detour shows up. You can see we've also placed temporary dams to work in a dry environment. And you'll note here, this orange bar, this detour, it extends through most of the projects because that's the way it's going to be. The traffic's going to be there. And so there will be times where some of these elements go longer than the other ones. And then we've got the bridge piers getting built. We've got the bridge girders getting placed. We've got the bridge deck getting poured, and then we're finishing up, and then we've got our final bridge. So we can go existing to proposed if we scrub real fast, or you can go through all the steps. So this is just a really cool example of something more complex that you can do if you want to do phasing. And then obviously you can go to the sequencer and tie that together with some pretty cool video cameras. And again, you can tie it together with visual graphics and scene effects and all sorts of things to try and communicate whatever it is through whatever phase you want as part of the video that you're putting together, or the image renders as part of Civil Engine. All right, and then finally I wanted to show one more example project. This one's called Urban Intersection. This was put together by Brian on our team. Just a really cool and simple example of something more urban than some of the example projects we have, which we know a lot of our users are going to be using Civil Engine for. So we've got this existing example. This is not very impressive. We've got parked cars on the streets. We're not utilizing any sort of green space or making this accessible for pedestrians and bikes. So he made an alternative, and I want to show this example because this is how you can do something for an alternative. If you go to our phases, we've just simply got existing, and then we've got protected bike lanes. So if we turn both of them off, we've got nothing. Protected bike lanes, we've got them back on. So you could do this where you have all the buildings and all that stuff placed one time and just not tagged. But for this one, he placed everything in both of them, and you're just turning everything on and off, which will work fine, especially for smaller projects where it's not going to take a long time to load all of those assets. We can also go to our Gantt chart, and we have this set up where we've got existing versus proposed. And if you wanted to overlap it a little bit, you could, but the problem here is you're going to get some Z fighting, which is where there's two things in the same spot. And so the easiest is just to have this a simple on-off switch like this. And then another thing you can do, if you know anything about video editing, this is something we can hopefully have in future versions of Civil Engine and the sequencer. But for now, if you want to do like a wipe fade, you just render one of the phases and then the other phase, and then you do the wipe fade in some sort of video editing software. But for now, you can have this just turned on and off, just like a binary switch using the Gantt chart system here. So this is kind of how you would handle alternatives. We could have a bunch of different alternatives all in the same space using the same system that we use for phases. All right, that's it for phasing. Join me in video 8, where we're going to cover everything about cameras and rendering.
Making the scene, blueprints in hand, we build what we mean, phasing it right, we got the plan in sight, that's right, building the future every day and night, come on, we construct the dreams on these endless streets, civil engines roaring, can't accept defeats, light check and start, no weak of the breeze.